What was the prophecy of Abel? I love to talk about the account of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4. There's a lot to be said about it. And even in these talks, I've discussed the idea of Cain's sacrifice before now. There's an interesting passage in the New Testament in the Gospel of Luke where he describes Abel as being a prophet. He talks about all the prophets from Abel to Zechariah. But what was the prophecy of Abel? You see, in Genesis chapter 4, we actually have nothing recorded that Abel said. And yet the whole point of prophecy would seem to be speaking out the words of God. Well, there is a clear clue as to what the prophecy of Abel was actually in the account of what God says to Cain. What did God say to Cain after he'd murdered Abel? He said, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. The prophecy of Abel was his blood. You see, if Genesis is true, and I believe with all my heart that it is, then Abel's blood was the first ever blood shed on the ground. Abel was the first ever human being to die because he was murdered by his brother. So his blood on the ground is the first blood on the ground and makes it very special. It in fact points to somebody else whose blood would be shed on the ground, Jesus Christ. The prophecy of Abel is pointing to Jesus Christ, and his death at the hands of a wicked sinner is a prophecy of the death of Jesus at the hands of wicked sinners, shed for the sins of wicked sinners, to bring them forgiveness if they will repent and put their trust in him. The prophecy of Abel, therefore, is so very important, and Jesus himself applied these prophecies to himself. What was Abel's prophecy? His very blood shed on the ground was the prophecy, and yet none of that makes sense if you do not believe that the first few chapters of Genesis, like the rest of Genesis, are literal historical truth.